Good day, I am Nicole Front, the leader of Group 104, where we have been assigned as a group to do the implementing of the ATP assignment for JLZ 300, where we discussed how we would implement the annual teaching plan in a way that addresses the needs of a diverse group of students, as well as discuss the importance of the CAPS document and the importance of diversity within the classroom. But in order to do this, we must take a couple of steps back. For starters, we must know what the CAPS document is and why it is important. So CAPS was introduced in South Africa in 2011 to provide guidelines for teaching and learning from grades R to 12. This promoted outcome-based learning as well as continuous assessment, and also helped create a standardization of education for all students. However, we see a problem here if we're going to be discussing CAPS and diversity, because if CAPS is something standardized and cannot be changed, then we have the problem of how we will modify our classrooms for a diverse classroom or for diverse students. And therefore, we must tackle this as teachers when we are making our lesson plans and annual teaching plans. But before we can do that, I also want to just touch on what diversity is and understanding diversity in the classroom context. Diversity is the understanding and acceptance of the variations among learners about their origins, customs, life experiences, aptitudes, learning preferences, and viewpoints. It covers a broad spectrum of characteristics such as race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, language, socioeconomic status, and disability, among other things. What's most important when we're talking about diversity in regards to education is something called equality and equity. Equality meaning that, yes, we have CAPS, and CAPS is there to make sure that every learner in South Africa gets a quality education. However, equity comes in where we discuss how we can make sure that every learner gets not just the same education, but the education that they need based on their criteria. This includes what kind of learner they are, such as visual, kinesthetic, or auditory. We also have different learning styles, such as stress learners, ease learners, scribble learners, as well as trust, teach, and copy learners. We also must discuss socioeconomic diversity, which is a very big part of our education world here in South Africa, because we have some big gaps in the economic statuses of many people, meaning that we must consider the financial background and the home background and environment that each learner comes from. We must also understand their cultural diversity, meaning their race and religion and ethnicity, what they experience at home culturally. And this also leads into linguistic diversity, where we talk about what kind of home languages these people have, and not just that, but also how well spoken they are in other languages that aren't their home language, and how we can address this in the classroom. From there, once again, we're going to go back to the analysis of the CAPS document, because not only do we need to know what it is, but we need to know as teachers what is inside of it. As teachers, we like to call a CAPS document a Bible, because it holds everything that we need in it. This meaning our assessment plans, our curriculum, our content, the subject that we need to focus on, step by step. We need to know it like the back of our hands, and therefore we must do an analysis of a CAPS document, and we chose as a group grade 10 life orientation because we felt that it worked well with the idea of diversity. When we did our analysis of the CAPS document, we looked for patterns that we could recognize within the document, and what we found is that the CAPS document is exactly what it says it is. It is a curriculum and assessment policy statement, meaning that it gives us the clear guidelines for assessment and curriculum. However, we must also know that CAPS was made after the NSC curriculum, and therefore it does actually promote the inclusion of diverse learners and encourages individualized education through a variety of approaches. However, we need to know as teachers how we can analyze our CAPS document to find those areas of diversity and inclusion within it. And what we see throughout the CAPS document is, and how they promote or bring about diversity, is differentiated learning outcomes, flexible curricula, integrated support services, inclusive pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching, as well as professional development, which means that the CAPS document does indeed hold strategies and approaches for teachers to go about including diversity. It's just a matter of a teacher being able to read the document and know how to take the inclusion and diversity out of the CAPS document. We have to move on to actually developing our annual teaching plans and lesson plans. And in order to do this, like I said, we must understand our CAPS document thoroughly, especially to our specific subject and grade level. We must also then identify key concept, skills, and values to be able to teach our subjects or our content, to be able to break down the curriculum into manageable units or themes, and also so that each learner can take away something from the concept or from the topic. Then we must also have proper sequencing and pacing, meaning that we make sure we have enough time to do each step for each topic, and also so that we flow our lessons in the correct way, so that it sounds it's in chronological order for our learners. And we also must be able to modify our annual teaching plans, because we spend time making the document or our ATPs or lesson plans, and therefore it's hard to want to change it. However, as teachers, we must understand that every classroom will be different, and therefore we have to be able to modify our ATPs to ensure that every learner and every class can get the best version of their marks based on your teaching. Therefore, to be able to modify our ATPs for diverse learners, we must recognize diversity. We must know what it is, and we also must be able to see it within our classes and take note of our learners. We must also use differentiated instruction, inclusive teaching practices, as well as individualized support to ensure that each learner is attended. And also, like I said earlier when we were discussing learning styles, we must know the difference between visual learners, auditory learners, as well as kinesthetic learners, and incorporate their needs into our ATPs. But also something important and maybe a bit less spoken about is English language learners, in the sense that in South Africa we have 11 official languages. However, English is our main scaffolded instruction or language of instruction. However, not everybody comes from an English home background, and therefore we must provide bilingual support for all of our learners, and also be able to know when we need to take steps if we can see someone is maybe not coping. We also need to take into account students with special needs, and this is not just physical disabilities. This can even be learners on the spectrum of autism, as well as having ADHD. We must be able to address it, speak to their guardians or their parents, and also within ourselves as teachers be able to manage them in a way that will allow them to still be productive in the class. From there on, we move to our direct teaching strategies, which we will use in order to not just make an annual teaching plan, but also to implement what we've written in our annual teaching plan. This once again talks about differentiated instruction, inclusive teaching practices, as well as individualized support, meaning that we will actually take what is in our annual teaching plan and be able to put it in a physical environment in the classroom, and ensure that all learners and their individual needs are met, while also creating an inclusive and safe classroom environment and providing support to those who need it. We must also have scaffolded instruction, where we break down our work into smaller tasks or manageable tasks. We also have culturally responsive teaching, which means that we also acknowledge and recognize our learners' cultural backgrounds and also try and incorporate relevance and inclusivity within our lesson so that people feel valued. We also need to have collaborative learning, where we encourage cooperation amongst our learners in the classroom to not only encourage an inclusive environment between the teacher and the learner, but also between the learners themselves, and being able to have tolerance and acceptance for each other. Examples of this and of these activities that we would use to create inclusivity is something like a worksheet here, for example, where we discuss everybody in the learners or everybody in the classrooms background and cultural heritage or language or foods or historical figures or people important to them, even if it's not cultural, so that we can create an environment where everybody feels welcome and accepted. We also must have other resources for our special needs children, such as textbooks, smart boards, and PowerPoint presentations to help cater to different learning styles like auditory, visual, kinesthetic. And also have other resources such as Braille, access notes and optics, or screen magnification for visually or auditory impaired learners to feel more included in the classroom. From there, we move on to assessment and evaluation. Now, this is very important because there are different steps to learning and the process of teaching. And this process of consolidation is important in our outcome-based learning in South Africa. And therefore, we must not just include diversity and inclusivity in our teaching plans and in our lesson plans, we also need to include it in how we teach in the classroom, and not just that, but also how we evaluate our learners. How we assess them is a very integral part of how aware of diversity we are, because every learner is different. Therefore, we do and we must follow the CAPS by using formative assessment, summative assessment, and performance tasks in order to stick to the outcome-based learning and continuous assessment approach we have in South Africa. However, we must also use strategies for fair and equitable assessment to ensure that we're still thinking of our diverse learners. Therefore, we must use differentiated assessment where we have different written, oral, and visual options. We must also have clear assessment criteria for learners' fairness, and also to make sure that we don't stress out our learners and so that they have full understanding of what is expected of them. Once again, accommodation and modification is so important. We must not be too staunch in our plans because things do change and each learner is different. And if we're going to say this, we have to be able to modify our teaching in accordance to them. We must also have culturally responsive assessments in which we once again are inclusive and we provide relevance to our learners so that they can relate to what they're working with and what they're being assessed on, and have an idea of what they're doing because it's something that they can relate to. And also quality feedback and support so that not only are our learners feeling safe in our diverse classroom environment, but also feeling as though that they can actually succeed within their education. From there, we made a case study for a diverse life orientation class where we have a teacher, Mrs. Smith, who is very passionate about her work and has a good amount of experience at a high school, teaching life orientation at a high school, and she has a classroom which has a incredible amount of diversity within it, and therefore she has to manage this. The diversity is especially within linguistics and language barriers, and she discusses how she uses visual aids and group discussion and collaboration in order to create a diverse student body that can work together as a classroom and in all relationships, learner to learner and teacher to learner. From here, we find some strategies from the case study, which us as teachers can learn, which is group case studies, which allows collaboration, as well as open-ended questions that allow for many answers and perspectives and analysis and contextualization to take place. We have teaching notes, which means that as teachers, we must also be able to look at ourselves and say, what are we doing wrong and what are we doing right? And be able to modify our teaching based on this. We must use project-based learning, which will once again encourage consolidation in group activity, but also to ignite interest and passion within our learners, because we want them to be ready for the outside world as well. And then finally, we also will discuss learning goals and precise instruction to ensure that once again, every student can excel and feel included. In conclusion, diversity is immensely important within the classroom, and not just because it is important for inclusivity here in South Africa, in our new age of South Africa, and not just politically, but also for the success of our learners. Without a safe environment to teach in, learners unfortunately will not be able to succeed, and therefore the inclusion of diversity within our ATPs and lesson plans is vital and must be taken into very much account. Thank you. This is group 104.